The kindest person in your life might be the one destroying you slowest. Not with a fist, not with a scream, with a smile that never cracks, and a favor that always comes with a price you don't see until it's too late. You've met them, you've worked for them, you've loved them, and somehow, every single time, they walk away clean while you're left picking up pieces you didn't even know were broken. Here's the part nobody tells you. They're not winning because they're smarter than you. They're winning because you're still playing checkers while they've been playing something else entirely. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that game is, and more importantly, how to stop losing it. If you've ever felt crazy after an argument with someone who somehow made you apologize for their behavior, stay right here. This is about to make a lot of painful memories suddenly make sense. Before we go further, 3 things. Comment the word power if you've ever dealt with someone like this. Hit subscribe so this channel keeps handing you the tools they hope you never find. Turn on notifications because the next video exposes the exact phrase manipulators use to test if you're an easy target. Now, let's get into it. Toxic people are not chaotic. That's the first illusion you need to destroy in your mind right now. Chaos would be easy to spot. Chaos would trigger your defenses immediately. What you're actually facing is order. A quiet, deliberate, endlessly repeated pattern that has been refined over years, sometimes over an entire lifetime, until it looks effortless. What looks like an explosive temper is often a calculated release, timed to the second, designed to make you flinch first. What looks like warmth is often a deposit, made only so a much larger withdrawal can be justified later. You are not dealing with disorder, you are dealing with a system, and systems can be studied. The first law of their game is simple, and explains almost everything that follows. They understand emotion better than they understand ethics. Most people spend their lives trying to be good. Toxic people spend their lives trying to be effective. That single difference in priority is the root of every advantage they seem to have over you. While you are asking yourself whether an action is fair, they are only asking whether it works. This is not a matter of intelligence. It is a matter of permission. They have granted themselves permission to do what you would never allow yourself to do, and that permission is the entire source of their power. Watch how they enter a room. They read faces before they read words. They know within seconds who craves approval, who fears conflict, who needs to be needed. This isn't a supernatural gift. It's practical. A person who has spent decades extracting value from others develops an instinct the same way a chess player develops an instinct for the board. They don't calculate every move. They feel the shape of the game and respond. You, meanwhile, are still consciously trying to be polite, to be fair, to give the benefit of the doubt. That hesitation, that decency is the exact gap they slide through. Here is the second law, and it will sting a little. Your empathy is their entry point, not your weakness, your strength. This is the cruelest part of the entire dynamic. Toxic people do not usually target the fragile. They target the generous, the forgiving, the ones who believe that if they just explain themselves clearly enough, the other person will finally understand and change. That belief, beautiful as it is precisely the belief they rely on to keep you circling back for more. Every time you extend grace to someone who has shown you repeatedly exactly who they are, you are not being naive. You are being read, and they are taking notes. Consider how they handle being caught. A normal person, confronted with clear evidence of wrongdoing, feels shame and tries to repair the damage. A toxic operator feels something closer to inconvenience. Their goal shifts instantly from concealment to redirection. Watch closely the next time you confront one of these people with facts. They will rarely deny the facts outright. That would be too obvious, too easy to disprove. Instead, they reframe the conversation entirely. Suddenly, you are the one being too sensitive. Suddenly, your tone is the real problem. Suddenly, they are hurt that you would even suggest such a thing after everything they've done for you. This is not an accident of emotional reactivity. It is a rehearsed maneuver. And it works almost every time because most people are not prepared for someone to respond to guilt with counterattack instead of remorse. This brings us to the third law. They do not fight fair because fairness was never the objective. Winning was. You have been taught your whole life that arguments are about who has the better point. Toxic people were taught, whether consciously or through years of trial and error, that arguments are about who controls the emotional temperature of the room. They will interrupt not because they lack manners, but because interruption disrupts your train of thought and reasserts dominance. They will bring up something from 3 years ago in the middle of an unrelated disagreement, not because it's relevant, but because it destabilizes you and buys them time. They will cry, not always from genuine pain, but because tears end scrutiny faster than any argument ever could. None of this is really about the topic at hand. It never was. It's about control of the frame. And whoever controls the frame controls the outcome. Now here is where most explanations of toxic behavior fail you, and where this one refuses to. They don't just tell you these people are bad and leave you there, feeling validated but still powerless. Understanding the mechanism is worthless if you don't understand why it works on you specifically. So let's turn the lens around for a moment, because the uncomfortable truth is that toxic dynamics are never one-directional. They are relationships, and relationships require two participants who are, at least for a while, playing complementary roles. If you've ever found yourself endlessly explaining your side to someone who clearly isn't listening, ask yourself honestly what you were hoping to achieve. Often the answer is validation. You wanted them to finally see you, finally admit fault, finally give you the closure that would let you stop replaying the conversation at 2 in the morning. That need, completely human and completely understandable, precisely what keeps you in the arena long after the fight is already lost. A person who understands the game accepts a harder truth. Some people will never give you the acknowledgement you deserve, and chasing it is not strength. It's a leash, and they are holding the other end. Before we go deeper into how to actually flip this dynamic, I want you to think about someone specific. A boss, an ex, a parent, a friend who always seems to come out ahead. Picture their face right now, because everything from here forward is going to make a lot more sense once you have a real person in mind. And I promise by the end, you'll see exactly where their pattern breaks. Let's talk about the mask, because almost nobody understands how it actually functions. You've heard the phrase wolf in sheep's clothing, but that image is slightly wrong. It suggests deliberate disguise, a costume put on to deceive. In most cases, it's closer to something else. The mask isn't separate from the person. It's the version of themselves they've built specifically because it gets results. Charm gets doors opened, charisma gets loyalty, warmth gets access. Over enough repetitions, the mask stops feeling like a performance to them and starts feeling like identity, even while the underlying behavior remains unchanged. This is why confronting a toxic person with your evidence rarely produces the reaction you expect. You're attacking a costume they genuinely believe is their skin. Here's a pattern worth studying closely across history and everyday life alike. Those who accumulate the most influence over others are rarely the loudest in the room. They are the ones who make everyone else feel like the most important person present, right up until they need something. The favor economy is real, and toxic operators are its most skilled traders. They give small, visible kindnesses early, deposits into an account of goodwill, and they remember every single one. Later, when they ask for something far larger, disproportionately larger, they will remind you, subtly or not, of everything they've done for you. This isn't generosity, it's investment. And investments expect returns. Let's talk about silence, because it might be the single most underrated weapon in their entire arsenal. Most people fear conflict. Toxic people, the effective ones, understand that withdrawal often produces more compliance than confrontation ever could. The sudden coldness, the unanswered message, the dinner where they barely speak. This isn't always sulking. Sometimes it's a controlled application of anxiety delivered without a single accusatory word. You find yourself apologizing for something you're not even sure you did, simply to end the discomfort of their silence. That discomfort was manufactured, and you walk straight into repairing a wound they never actually had. Now, the part you've been waiting for. How do you actually change the outcome? Not through confrontation, because direct confrontation almost always fails against someone who has spent years preparing for exactly that moment. Not through explanation, because explanation assumes good faith on the other side. And good faith is precisely what's missing. The real shift happens somewhere quieter and far more powerful. It happens when you stop needing anything from them at all. This is the fourth law, and it's the one that actually breaks their entire system. Toxic dynamics run on your predictability. They know which buttons produce which reactions because you've pressed the same ones the same way for years. The moment you become unpredictable, not erratic, but genuinely unreadable, their playbook stops working. Think about it from their perspective for a moment. Their entire method depends on knowing, almost instinctively, how you'll respond to guilt, to silence, to charm, to anger. When you calmly withhold the reaction they're fishing for, when you respond to their manufactured crisis with nothing but a flat, unbothered question, you remove their only tool. They are, in that instant, improvising for the first time in years, and improvisation is where they are weakest. Detachment is often mistaken for coldness, but real detachment is something closer to clarity. It means observing someone's behavior as data rather than as a referendum on your worth. When a toxic person tests a boundary, and they will always test it, calmly, they are not asking you a question you need to answer with justification. They are running an experiment to see what they can get away with. The moment you understand that every interaction with them is an experiment, your entire emotional relationship to their behavior changes. You stop taking the bait personally and start simply recording the results. Boundaries fail almost universally for one reason. They are announced instead of enforced. Toxic people do not respect boundaries that exist only as sentences. A boundary that isn't backed by consequence is, to them, an invitation to test it again. Slightly harder, slightly later. Real boundaries are demonstrated, not declared. You don't need to tell someone you won't tolerate being spoken to a certain way. You simply end the conversation every single time, without exception, the moment it happens. Consistency, not intensity, is what finally teaches them the cost of crossing the line. They are, after all, students of pattern themselves. Give them a new one to learn. Here's something almost nobody says out loud because it sounds harsh, but it will save you years of exhaustion. Stop trying to win the argument. Start trying to exit the game. Every minute you spend constructing the perfect rebuttal, the airtight explanation that will finally make them see reason, is a minute spent still playing on their terms. They are comfortable in argument. It's their home field. Your leverage was never in out-arguing them. It was always in your ability to simply stop showing up to the match at all. Watch what happens to a manipulator when their target becomes indifferent. Not hostile, indifferent. Hostility is still engagement, and engagement is still fuel. Genuine indifference is starvation. You will often see an escalation before the collapse, a sudden increase in charm or crisis or accusation, because on some level they can sense the supply drying up and they're testing whether louder tactics will restore it. This is the moment most people break and go back, mistaking the escalation for proof that the person truly cares. It is more often the opposite. It's the last flare of a system realizing it's losing its host. Let's address something important, because this isn't about becoming cold or manipulative yourself. That would simply make you fluent in their language without changing the outcome for your own life. The goal was never to out-manipulate the manipulator. The goal is to become someone whose well-being no longer depends on their approval, their explanation, or their change of heart. That single shift, internal quiet, often invisible to everyone around you, is worth more than 100 perfectly worded confrontations. There's a particular kind of freedom that arrives the moment you stop needing someone to admit they were wrong. It doesn't come from forgiving them, necessarily, and it doesn't require reconciliation. It comes from recognizing that their admission was never actually required for your healing to begin. You were simply told by years of hoping that it was. Release that requirement, and an enormous amount of your power returns to you almost immediately. Now, practically, here's how this looks day to day. When someone tries to guilt you into an old pattern, don't defend yourself. Ask a plain, curious question instead, and then wait. Silence, used by you instead of against you, is remarkably disarming. When someone brings up unrelated grievances mid-conversation, name it calmly. We're talking about this specific thing right now. Refuse the detour without anger. When someone goes cold to punish you, resist the urge to chase the warmth back. Let the silence be theirs to sit in. You are not obligated to perform anxiety just because they've withdrawn affection as leverage. Watch their reaction to your calm. This is often the clearest diagnostic you'll ever get. A person who is simply having a bad day, who genuinely didn't realize their impact, will usually soften when you set a boundary. They might apologize, adjust, even thank you later for the honesty. A person who is running a system will not soften. They will escalate or they will discard you the moment you stop being useful. And either reaction tells you everything you needed to know, faster than any confrontation ever could have. It's worth understanding why some people build their entire identity around this way of operating in the first place. Not to excuse it, but because understanding the origin removes its mystery, and mystery is where its power over your imagination lives. Almost universally, beneath the calculated behavior, there is an old, unresolved fear of powerlessness. Somewhere at some point, often very early, they learned that vulnerability was dangerous and control was survival. The charm, the manipulation, the calculated warmth, all of it is often a very sophisticated defense system built by someone who decided long ago that being fully seen was too risky to ever allow again. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable. It makes it explainable, and explainable things are far less frightening than behavior that seems to come from nowhere. Here's a final piece of the puzzle that changes how you'll see every future interaction. Toxic people are, in a strange way, incredibly consistent, which is actually the gift hidden inside all of this. Once you understand someone's core mechanism, their favorite lever, their predictable escalation pattern, their tell right before they turn cold, you gain something enormously valuable. Predictability. See the move 3 steps before it lands. The way a seasoned player sees an opponent's strategy unfolding long before the final piece moves. What used to blindside you into a spiral of confusion and self-doubt becomes, over time, almost boring. And boring is exactly the opposite of the reaction they've spent years engineering you to have. Let's talk about the opening move, because almost every toxic relationship, romantic, professional, or familial, begins with an intensity that feels less like normal connection and more like a flood. It has a name now, thrown around casually online, but the mechanism behind it deserves real attention. In the beginning, they give you more attention than feels reasonable, more compliments than you're used to, more availability, more mirroring of your interests, more declarations that you're different, special, finally understood. It feels incredible because it's designed to feel incredible. It's not usually conscious calculation in the moment, but it functions exactly like one. That flood serves two purposes at once. It creates a reference point so intoxicating that anything less later feels like rejection, and it accelerates trust far faster than trust should ever be built. By the time the mask begins to slip weeks or months in, you're already anchored to that early high, spending the rest of the relationship quietly trying to get back to it, without realizing the version of them you fell for might never have been sustainable in the first place. Notice how quickly the story flips once real conflict begins. The same person who seemed endlessly confident during the good phase suddenly becomes fragile the second accountability enters the room. This is the victim maneuver, and it is devastatingly effective because it borrows the language of genuine pain to disable genuine criticism. You raise something they did. Within moments, somehow they are the one who is wounded, exhausted, misunderstood, attacked. Your original concern doesn't just go unanswered, it gets buried under the urgent new task of managing their distress. This works because most people were raised to prioritize comforting someone in visible pain over pursuing their own point, even when that pain arrives suspiciously on cue. Recognizing that timing is everything. Genuine hurt doesn't usually arrive at the exact moment it becomes strategically useful. There's also a subtler version of control worth naming, because it rarely gets called out directly. It's the slow erosion of your own certainty, achieved not through big dramatic lies, but through small, persistent contradictions. They said one thing, then insist they said another. They promise something, then act as though the promise never existed. Individually, each moment feels too small to fight about. Collectively, over months, they teach your own mind to distrust itself before it distrusts them. This is precisely the point. A person who no longer trusts their own memory or perception will always eventually default to trusting the person standing in front of them, insisting on a different version of events. Rebuilding that internal trust is often the real work, far more than any single confrontation could ever be. Money, time, and access to other people are three resources toxic operators quietly try to control, because control over resources is control over exit options. Watch for the subtle discouragement of your other friendships, framed as concern rather than jealousy. Watch for decisions about shared finances that always seem to leave you slightly more dependent than before. Watch for how your calendar slowly fills with obligations to them, until there's less and less room for anyone or anything else. None of this needs to look dramatic to be effective. Isolation rarely announces itself. It simply accumulates one reasonable sounding request at a time, until you look up one day and realize how small your world has become. Here's something that will reframe how you view every future encounter with someone like this. Their reaction to your growth is the single most honest test available to you. Watch what happens when you get a promotion, make a new close friend, start setting boundaries, or simply seem happier without their involvement. A person who genuinely wants good things for you will celebrate, even if imperfectly. A person operating from control will feel something closer to threat, because your growing independence directly reduces their leverage. That threat might show up as subtle undermining of your achievement, sudden new demands on your time right when you're thriving, or a strange coldness that appears exactly when your life starts working without them. Pay very close attention to how someone responds to your success. It tells you more about their intentions than almost anything they'll ever say directly. Recovery from this dynamic isn't really about proving anything to them anymore. Eventually, the work turns inward. It's about noticing the specific fear that made you so easy to hold on to in the first place. For some, it's a fear of being alone. For others, a fear of being seen as difficult or unlovable or too much. Toxic dynamics are remarkably good at finding that fear and quietly feeding it. Just enough to keep you compliant, never enough to make you leave. Naming your own fear, even just to yourself, takes away a huge amount of its silent leverage. What operates in the dark loses most of its power the moment you drag it into the light. This is ultimately not a story about villains and victims. It's a story about leverage, and leverage can shift. The moment you understand the mechanics behind the charm, the silence, the guilt, and the sudden reasonableness that appears right when you're about to walk away, you stop being a participant reacting blindly and become an observer who simply chooses calmly and on your own terms whether to stay in the game at all. The people who seem to always win were never unbeatable. They were simply undiagnosed. Now that you can see the pattern, carry something they can no longer take from you. If this changed how you see someone in your life, comment the word power right now and subscribe, because the next video breaks down the exact opening line manipulators use to find out, within seconds of meeting you, whether you're worth the effort.